Before we get into the video, I just want to say really quickly, if you like the video, if you want to see me take down more apologists, give counter apologetics to people like Allen Parr, Frank Turek, Paul Copan, and all of these terrible apologists, subscribe, like the video. We're going to get into it.
Okay, so question number one, does the Bible condone slavery? Now, first,
Yes. So this is different than the question of the title of the video. Does the Bible condone slave masters beating their slaves? Whereas the answer might be a little bit ambiguous because it doesn't say you should do this or you ought do this. It just says if you do this, as long as it meets this certain set of circumstances, the slave doesn't die as a result of the beating, then you're not going to be punished for what you've done. Whereas condone slavery in general, the Bible absolutely accepts and allows slavery. It does. It just does. This is not there's you can't argue this. God loves him some slavery. He just does. Read the Old Testament. It happens all the time. From accepting and allowing, condoning slavery, all the way up to God explicitly commanding slaves to be taken, not prisoners of war. I'm talking about slave labor to be taken from citizens, peaceful citizens. This is commanded by God in the Bible. The Bible condones slavery. Let's move on.
first and foremost, we need to understand some things that the Bible does not condone a lot of things, but when there are laws that are created in the Old Testament, it's primarily because the thing that the law is referring to is something that God does not want to happen. Think about it. You don't create laws to regulate things that God does want to happen. No, you create laws to regulate things that God does not want to happen. Let me give you.
Well, see, he's putting that word regulate in there, right? Um, murder, it's flat out banned in the Bible. Thou shalt not murder. You don't do it. You don't lie. You don't steal. You don't covet your neighbor's wife. Whatever. There's hundreds of these laws that is explicit. Do not do this. Now, that's different from the slavery thing because it never says do not do this. It says you are allowed to do this under these certain sets of circumstances, right? It never says don't do it, such as with the Ten Commandments primarily, but there's hundreds of these laws that says do not, full stop. It's clear. It's not open for interpretation, right? Whereas not so much with slavery, so it's not comparable as things that God regulate. He regulates slavery. He bans things he does not want to happen. But let's keep going.
An example. The Bible has all sorts of laws about what happens when a man murders another man or
Well,
another.
yeah. So yeah, that's I mean exactly. That's exactly what I was just saying. It has laws for what happens if somebody murders another person, right? But it it's banned. You just don't do it. It doesn't say you can murder somebody on a Tuesday but not on a Wednesday. The Sabbath is open for murder. You're supposed to be resting, but why not go and murder somebody? It doesn't say any of that. Doesn't it just says don't do it. Do not do it. But it does not say that so much for slavery, which is the key distinction between regulating slavery and banning murder. But let's keep going.
Other woman. But does that mean that God condones murder just because there are laws in the Bible that talk about what you should do if murder happens? No. But let's talk about divorce.
Sure, there are. Okay, it's a complete false equivalency that he just did. There's no comparison between these two things. He's talking about laws that are created, what you should do if murder happens. Right. What are the punishments for the law that you just broke? I agree with him there. There are, there's, depending on the circumstance, there's different punishments for it, right? But that's not how slavery works in the Bible. Slavery isn't a law that you can break. Owning a slave isn't banned. It's not illegal. It's condoned. So it's 100% different. But we'll keep going.
Divorce. The Bible does not condone or encourage divorce, but God, even through Jesus in the New Testament, says, I know that your hearts are hard. You're going to do it anyway. And so, because I know you're going to get divorced anyway, let me make sure that there are laws in place in your culture to ensure that people are going to be treated properly in situations that are less than ideal and outside of God's perfect will. Another example is the Bible has laws about what should happen if somebody has sex with an animal, right? Does it mean that God is condoning bestiality? No.
He's being deliberately obtuse about this, right? He's saying there's laws of what you should do if somebody does this. Well, that's because people are breaking the law. Of course, you can't just say, "Hey, that's against the law," and then well, people say, "Well, what happens if somebody breaks it?" And you're like, "Oh, yeah." Relations with an animal. You don't do it, you get put to death if you do it, right? Because you just broke a commandment. It's not one of the 10 commandments. He put that one pretty far down in the list, but it's in there. No such law exists for slavery. He's comparing these things that are, we'll just say, illegal, right? I know it's not a legal system. It's God's will, but we'll just say that he's comparing these things that are illegal against slavery, which is not illegal. They're not breaking any laws. There are no punishments for owning for being a slave master. There just aren't. But we'll keep going.
No, he's setting up laws to make sure that the community knows how to handle situations when people get out of line. And that is exactly what's happening here with the concept of slavery. It was never God's intent for a person to be the property of another person. But God, once again, knows that these things are going to happen, and he wants to make sure that
As always with these videos, I will be repeating myself because they're repeating themselves. So what else am I supposed to read if they keep saying the same crap over and over again? Well, it turns out I probably will too. But it's not uh
God, once again, knows that these things are going to happen.
it's not that he knows these things are going to happen, so he has to create a system in which these things can be done. They can be done properly, such as murder. People are going to murder anyway, right? But God doesn't regulate murder, he bans it. No such thing with slavery. No such thing with slavery. This is not comparable.
And he wants to make sure that the community is not going to take advantage of this and mistreat people who are going to become slaves in a couple of ways, which we'll talk about a little bit later in this video. And he needs to make sure
Being there's it is impossible to not mistreat a slave because being a slave inherently is being mistreated. If you are not a free person, the mistreatment is already done. You can't treat a slave properly. It's an oxymoron. You can't do it. There's no such thing as a proper way to treat a slave. There's no such thing as a proper way to force force relations on somebody. You can't properly do these things. You just don't do them. But it's the Bible, so
that there are laws in place to ensure that people are going to be treated fairly and properly. So, to be clear, the Bible
you see how he said to ensure that people are going to be treated fairly and properly, and he didn't say that slaves are going to be treated fairly and properly? Do you see how stupid that sounds? Are those slaves treated fairly? No, they're slaves. Of course they're not treated properly. You can't. Jesus. If his only argument here, and I'll hand it to him, if his only argument is that there's a worse way to treat a slave, I agree. There are worse forms of slavery than what is prescribed in the Bible. At least in Exodus, right? Because these protections don't necessarily apply to people outside of the 12 Hebrew nations. Um, they don't apply. Outside of these 12 tribes, um, no such protections exist. In fact, it explicitly says you must not rule over your fellow Israelite slaves ruthlessly. No such protection exists for non-Israelite slaves. It just doesn't. But we keep going.
Bible does not condone or encourage the mistreatment of slaves. However, it does allow for slavery. But this is going to lead us into the second question. What exactly
Does the Bible condone slavery? Is section 1 of this video, and he ends it with the Bible does allow slavery. The definition of condone, to accept and allow. So he says no, the Bible doesn't condone slavery. It just allows slavery. This is condoning it. If you are the dictator of a country and you allow something to happen, you are condoning that action. You and you alone have the ability to make the rules governing this society. It is up to you. Nobody has a higher authority. It's yours. You own it. You get to do it. And you allow something, you condone it. You just do. But you know, Jesus.
is slavery in the Bible? And so, as we look at the concept of slavery, people became slaves.
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. What did he say? What type of slavery is this? Oh, okay, so it's it's indentured servitude. This is not indentured servitude. You can look through my other videos, my other slavery apologetic videos where I covered indentured servitude explicitly. I focused only on indentured servitude against this argument. It's not indentured servitude, but it doesn't matter, right? It doesn't matter what kind of slavery it is, because there's no such thing as the good kind of slavery. You can argue there's a better kind of slavery than the worst kind of slavery, like I just said. But it doesn't matter what kind of slavery it is because it's all bad. Even if you grant this argument in its entirety that it's just indentured servitude, which it's not. But even if you do grant it, it doesn't matter because it's still grossly immoral and disgusting.
In the Old Testament in a couple of different ways. So let's first deal with the case of a Hebrew enslaving or being enslaved by another Hebrew. All right. So in most situations, this happened because maybe you were in debt, you were not able to pay your debt off to
You can sell your if okay. So talking just about the Hebrew slaves. This is covering Exodus. Talking just about that, right? You can sell your daughter into slavery. So this isn't covering what did you just say? Like, if you're poor, if you have bills to pay, if you want to pay off debt, if you can't eat. No, it's not voluntary, and you can sell your daughter into slavery. How is this to what? Pay off a bill? It's disgusting.
someone, or maybe you really hit hard times and you needed a place to live.
And there's just nothing else you can do except sell off your daughter. It's disgusting.
You needed food, you needed provision, you needed clothing, and you did not have the money to provide for yourself, or you couldn't pay off your debt. And as a result, all you could do was work for someone else in order to pay off your debt or to get the proper food, provision, and clothing that you would need to survive. This is called indentured servanthood or
That's not indent. That no. First off, that's not even indentured servitude. I guess it can be a form of it, sort of ish, kind of. But again, if you are the dictator, like God, of a society, you have, let's just say there's only two options to make this easy. There's only two options. You can create we'll say a country, a nation, where people, where your economic system has collapsed so terribly that people are starving and homeless. This is God's society, by the way. It's collapsed. If you've reached a point where your subjects are starving and homeless, um, and you have two ways to remedy this. And mind you, you are the dictator. Nobody can say your word is the word. You get input from nobody else. And you have two options. One option is to say, okay, starving, hungry, hungry, homeless, poor, you can sell yourself as a slave to another person who has more money than you, and they'll feed you and they'll house you. Or you could say, hey, if your fellow human being is starving and homeless, feed them and house them. You're God. You're the all loving creator of the universe, and this is a dictate. This is an edict that you can put out there. Which one do you do? Which one do you do? Do you create a system of slavery or create a system of housing and food for all? What do you do? Well, which would you choose? God chose slavery. I don't think I would, but we'll keep going.
indentured servitude, where you voluntarily choose to work for
God, sorry for stopping so much and so often, but I just described a situation where it was not voluntary for the daughter. You can sell your daughter into slavery. This is where's the choice? How is it voluntary for her? She cannot say no. So it's already not voluntary in all circumstances. Is some of it voluntary? Sure, but not for the women, right? They don't go free as the men do. It explicitly says that in Exodus 21.
someone else. This was one of the ways in which a person became a slave in the Old Testament, specifically regarding a
It is one of the ways. Will we get into the other ways, Alan? Will we? Will
Hebrew
we?
becoming a slave to another Hebrew. However,
Hmm.
there are some very specific rules that God set in place to ensure the proper treatment of these slaves. Let's take a look at Exodus
Again, he's half right and he's all wrong. Okay? He did set up rules to ensure um I mean, I, again, I'm repeating myself because so are they. There's no such thing as a proper treatment of a slave. What he should say is God set up a condition upon which owning slaves you cannot it cannot be the worst kind of slavery imaginable. If he had said that, I would agree. I wouldn't have had to have paused the video. But he didn't say that. He said set up conditions in which your slaves are treated properly. They're slaves. You can't treat it's already owning another human being as property is already improper treatment. It just is. But we'll keep going. Oh my goodness. This video is 18 minutes long and we're 5 minutes in. Oh boy. Okay.
chapter 21, verses 2 through 6. It says here,
Hmm.
if you buy a Hebrew slave, he may serve for no more than 6 years. So right away, we see that God sets a limitation on how long you can own or have a slave. This person is not going to be your slave for life. You must set them free after 6 years. Notice was no matter what the debt is, set them free because it's never God's intent for you to be the property of someone else. Notice, let's keep
Liar.
going.
You
Set him
liar. You're a liar, Allen Parr. You are a liar. It's never God's intent that they will be a slave for life, except where it says you can own your slaves for life. You can give them to your children. They are your property. If you die, they don't even go free if you die. They go to your kids, and oh, come on, that was a lie, Alan. Thou shalt not lie. It's in the top 10, buddy.
free in the seventh year, and he will owe you nothing for his freedom. In other words, the debt has been paid off, whatever it is. 6 years maximum.
Okay, so the debt has been paid off, right? So let's just say that the debt has been paid off. But he also said that you might voluntarily commit yourself into slavery for 6 years if you're hungry. Um, so what do you do for food after that? And I know that there in later on in the Bible there's you gotta give him a handy on the way out and all this good stuff. Let's keep going.
Sentence. If he was single, when he became your slave, he shall leave single. But if he was married before he became a slave, then his wife must be freed with him. Now, already you're seeing some
Is he gonna go? Is he gonna continue on? Is he gonna do it? Is he gonna continue on? Hold on.
very huge differences between the slave with him. Now, all was married before he became a slave, then his
Yeah,
wife must be freed with him. Now,
yeah,
already you're
yeah. Are we gonna talk about what happens if he was married after he became a slave, Alan? Do the women go free as the men do? I don't know. Are we gonna get into it? We're gonna just kind of glaze past it.
you're seeing some very huge differences between the slave trade that we saw here in the United
Okay,
States and
another thing that is annoying, I'm just going to touch on this very quickly because this is already going to be a very, very long video. So I'll just go into it quickly. I don't care. I don't care. It was nothing. It was. Let's be clear. Let's be very clear. It was comparable in many ways. But for the sake of argument, I don't care. We'll grant this argument. It was nothing like modern day slavery. It was nothing like the transatlantic slave trade. It was nothing like it. Okay, Ellen, it was nothing like it. It was vastly different. It's not even comparable. I'm granting it to you. Slavery is slavery. Which one was worse? I don't know. I don't care. It's all slavery. It's all slavery. So I don't care. I won't get into this argument very much.
slavery in the Old Testament. In the United States, people were separated from their families. Women were raped. They were taken and beaten and taken by slave
Definitely none of this happened in ancient Near East culture. None of these things took place. That's for
owners, and
sure.
people were separated from their families and things like that. No, in this culture, if you came in with a wife, you were to leave with that wife. Now let's keep reading. If his master gave him a wife while he was a slave
Okay.
and they had sons or daughters, then only the man will be free in the seventh year, but his wife and children will still belong to his master.
I'm very curious. So he didn't skip it. I'm going to give him credit for that because this is a brave this is a brave territory for a apologist to enter. It's dangerous. The floor is sticky. You don't know why it's sticky, but your feet are sticking to the floor. There's weird sounds coming from the doors down the hallway. This is dangerous territory for an apologist because the woman is not to go free as the man does in the seventh year. And I'm curious as to why that is. He will not. He can't touch. He can't go over that, right? Is he gonna do it? Because that's opening one of the doors where one of the creepy noises are coming from. An apologist can't open that door. They can't do it. So I'm assuming he's gonna glaze over that one. He has to, because he just went over how all slaves go free in the seventh year, while explicitly reading a verse that says the woman does not go free as the man does in said seventh year. So clearly, these protections for the slaves just don't apply to the women. They just don't. They don't. They don't. Stop. You're getting mad. If you're a Christian and you made it this far into this video, you're getting mad right now. You're starting to seethe, but it's true. So just accept that the women do not go free as the men do, as we see time and time again. We'll keep going. I'm curious. I'm curious where he'll go with this.
Now, this is pretty obvious here, but the reason for this is because let's just say you're a woman and you have a lot of debt and you come in and let's say you've only been working for a couple of months for this particular owner and you end up getting married off to a man who's already been there for 6 years and he's getting ready to leave. So now you get to go free with this man and you've only served for your debt as a woman for a couple of months, but because this man is getting ready to be freed, you get to go along with him. So no, God set it up to where it's like, okay, no,
He opened the door. He did it. My mind is actually blown. He did. He did. He did do it. But that's not what this says. So he opened the door, but he just peeked inside. He was a tour guide. He opened the door very quickly and he shut it. That's what he did just now. He didn't want to see, he didn't want anybody else to see. But that's not what this says. And that's not what it means. It's not. The women do not go free as the man does, because it doesn't say it. What it does not say is that you must serve your full term, whether you are a man or a woman. It it says the women do not go free, because in if it said what Alan is trying to make it seem like it says, which even if you grant his argument, it's still disgusting, right? The woman's not to go free because she's gonna be a slave for 7 years, even if she gets married off to a man who might be able to pay off her debt. It doesn't matter. You're a slave. You're gonna do it for 7 years, but that's not the case. That's still disgusting. If that were the case, it wouldn't say the woman shouldn't go free, because let's flip the script. Let's say that a man comes in for 2 months and the woman has served almost her 7 years. It doesn't say that. It says that the woman shall not go free as the man does. That's all it says. It says nothing about the amount of time being served. It says nothing about there's no said such protection, or not protection. There's no such punishment really in place for the man who might be in Alan Parr's fake situation here, where he only serves for 2 months. That's not what this says. It's not what it means. This is another flat out lie. It just is. It is. But we'll keep going.
No, if I give you a wife while you're my slave, then she belongs to me and you can end up going free. All right, so let's keep going. But the slave may declare, I love my master, my wife, and my children. I don't want to go free. If he does this, his master must present him before God. Then his master must take him to the door or doorpost and publicly pierce his ear with an awl. After that, the slave will serve his master for life. So notice the time that you served as a slave, you
Yeah, and what about the children? Right? Do they have to serve their full 7 years? Why don't they get to go free? If Alan's fake hypothetical, where a woman who just, only served 2 months of her 7 year sentence, why don't the children get to go free? Curious. Curious.
could have a wife, you could have children, you could be
Also interesting that these hypothetical women who only served 6 months of their 7 year sentence have children. It's a bit strange that you know in 6 months.
given a wife, you had a home, you had provisions, and you could
And another thing that's gross, given a wife.
actually get paid a wage while you are serving as a slave. So let's continue reading another passage of scripture in the book of Leviticus. If one of your fellow Israelites falls into poverty and is forced to sell himself to you, once again, indentured servanthood, do not treat him as a slave. Treat him instead as a hired worker or as a temporary resident
Sure, yeah, I get it. It's still all gross.
who lives with you, and he will serve you only until the year of Jubilee. So, once again, do you see the difference? That's the reason why you have to be very careful when people say, oh, the Old Testament encourages slavery. No, the slavery in the Old Testament is very different than the slavery that we saw here in the United States. Now,
Don't
let's
care.
read another passage. In Deuteronomy 15, it says this: when you release a male servant, do not send him away empty handed. Give him a generous farewell gift from your flock, your threshing floor, and your wine press. Share with him some of the bounty with which the Lord your God has blessed you. Now, you can see right away that there is some very huge differences between how slaves are treated in this culture and how
Yeah.
slaves are treated in the United States.
Yeah, you can see some differences, but you can also see a lot of similarities.
They weren't going to send you out the door. Man, first of all, you're not going to get free, period. That's first thing. But even if you did get free, they're not going to send you out with a gift and a generous farewell package. No, because God was not in that, right? God here is saying, hey, let's make sure that if somebody has to hire themselves out to be a slave, which is one of the worst things that they could
To be fair, maybe if God had said, "Thou shalt not own slaves," maybe, maybe none of modern slavery would have happened at all. Maybe, possibly, maybe it would have been a little bit less. I don't know.
possibly experience, let's make sure that we treat them with dignity and respect, not as property, but as an individual. Now let's look at another way that slaves were acquired, and that was when Hebrews would acquire slaves from Gentile nations. So typically, what would happen is that whenever the Israelites would go into war and they would conquer these other nations, typically there would be one of three things that they would do. Either A, they would kill all the people who was there so that
By God's direct command, yes, I agree.
nobody would
Good,
survive,
good, good.
or B, they would take some of the women to be their wives, which is
How do you just say that? How do you just say that they would take some of the nations that they just conquered after killing all of their sons and husbands? They would take them. They would take them. Take the women for wives. This is disgusting, Allen Parr.
actually an act of goodwill.
He didn't. He didn't say it. He didn't say it. I'm going to pretend he didn't say it. I'm going to pretend that Allen Parr didn't just say that after a nation was conquered and you've killed all of the sons and husbands, that you spared their lives by making them your wife, was an act of goodwill. Alan, you've reached a new level of disgusting. I think I've only done maybe one or two Alan Parr videos, but boy, an act of goodwill, he
Because
says.
these women, all the men were dead, and so how would they provide for
Because they because they just killed them. Because they just killed them, Alan Parr. Now, mind you, he likes to say he paints it in this light of warring nations, but these aren't soldiers we're talking about. Even if it was, still disgusting to take a dead soldier's wife that you just killed and make them your wife. That's gross. That's immoral. That's disgusting. That's the Bible. Um, all right, you know what? We gotta keep going. We're too late.
themselves? How would they make it in society? So it was actually an act of will, a generous, a goodwill for the Hebrews to take these women and allow them to have provision.
I choose death. I choose death. If you come in and you kill my family, you murder my husband, you murder my sons, and you take my daughters to be given to somebody else as their wife. Um, I don't want to marry you. If the choice is marriage or death, I for one choose death. It's not an act of goodwill. You are not kind. Uh,
And to be able to have children and things of that nature. And then the third thing is that they would take these people to be slaves, sparing their lives, but allowing them to work in the Hebrew culture. So let's see what it says about this particular type of slavery. However, you may purchase male and female slaves from among the nations.
Interesting. Interesting that he opens this up with um you have you have three options. You go to war with a nation, you win, you're victorious, you're the conquering nation, and you have three options what to do with the women of that culture because you've already killed all the men. You can take them as wives, take them as slaves, or you can kill them, and then immediately goes into how a completely different thing about purchasing a slave. This has nothing to do with war prisoners. This is purchasing slaves from other nations. But let's keep going.
Nations around you, you may also purchase the children of temporary residents who live among you, including those who have been born in your land. You may treat them as your property, passing them on to your children as a permanent inheritance. You may treat them as slaves, but you must never treat your fellow Israelites this way. So, one
I'm gonna say it. I think Alan Parr is after watching this video is a disgusting, immoral human being in so far as his slavery is his apologetics. Maybe he's a great person. I don't know. He gets paid to lie. That's what he does. I get it. But he is covering some of the tougher verses that a lot of apologists like to completely ignore. He's doing it in some of the most disgusting way possible, but hey, he's bringing them up, and I'm going to give him credit for it. You get credit,
Once
one
again,
credit.
yeah, it's pretty clear that the Bible does allow for slavery. However, the idea of mistreatment of slaves is significantly and highly condemned. And we're going to see here that there are several
No,
passages of
no,
scripture
no. All of the verses that he has said regarding the treatment of slaves has been explicitly for your fellow Israelite, your fellow Hebrew slave. Those provisions, as he just read, he just said it. You must not rule over your. I don't know what particular version of the Bible he read it from, but the verse that I know the best, it says you must not rule over your fellow Israelite ruthlessly, your fellow Israelites ruthlessly. And no such protections exist for Gentile slaves. They don't. He's going to get into some verses. We'll cover them. Um, but I haven't seen one that provided any type of protections for Gentile slaves.
that talk about the proper treatment of slaves in this instance. Now, let's read some. First and
Mhm.
foremost, kidnapping was completely condemned and punishable in
Don't care. This is a thing that every apologist, I won't say a lot, I won't say most, every apologist likes to do is conflate kidnapping with slavery. Nothing that he has described so far has anything to do with kidnapping. In the previous verse that he just read, this is purchasing another slave, and I want to quickly touch on. He said that the Bible allows it but doesn't encourage it, which is another lie. There are verses that explicitly say that you are to take peaceful citizens of a town and make them your slave, your labor slaves, not your indentured servitude. I can't remember the Hebrew ibad or ibah, whichever one means slave. It's that word. I think it's ibad. It uses that word. It uses slaves. It says, "What do you do with people who surrender peacefully to you? You make those people your slaves." But back to the kidnapping bit. This has nothing to do with anything. This is a nothing burger. I don't care about kidnapping in a biblical sense, of course. Um, it has nothing to do with slavery. It's not. Yeah, okay. It says, don't kidnap people. It does. It says it. It does. Sure. But what's that got to do with purchasing a slave from another nation? What's it got to do with taking a peaceful citizen as your slave? Nothing. The answer is nothing.
the Old Testament. Now, that already is very different than the type of slavery that we saw in the United States, where Africans were kidnapped and taken away against their will. Here it says they can purchase or buy these slaves. So let's read about this. All right. It says here, whoever steals a man and sells him, and anyone found in possession of him shall be put to death.
Yeah,
So
it does say
anybody in the United States who was guilty of stealing Africans or
that. I don't know why he's bringing this up, but they all do. Um, they all bring it up, and I don't understand why. Because a lot of African slaves weren't necessarily kidnapped. I mean, yeah, I guess it could all be a form of kidnapping. But they were brought over from Africa from they were war captives themselves. Not in every instance, obviously. It just has nothing to do with kidnapping. I don't know why they
kidnapping
go
them
into
and taking
this.
them over to the United States, according to this verse, should have been killed. All right. And the New Testament encourages the same thing as well. In 1 Timothy 1:10, it says this: the law is for people who are sexually immoral or who practice homosexuality.
Why is he bringing up the New Testament? This is thousands of years after the Old Testament rules were written. The people who lived under the Deuteronomy and Leviticus and Exodus times didn't have any of this nonsense. They didn't have any of this. This verse is extremely problematic in itself, not for a Christian, because most Christians are bigots. Because because it lumps slave traders, liars, promise breakers, um, and the sexually immoral. It lumps all of those people in with uh, homosexuality. I mean, basically the same. Basically the same thing. Slave traders, gay people, it's easy to get them mixed up.
Or are slave traders, liars, promise breakers,
But again, I just want to touch real quick here. I don't care. It doesn't matter what the New Testament has to say. Not that it has anything good to say about slaves. It doesn't. But it's irrelevant in this context because they didn't have such provisions. The people of the Exodus, Deuteronomy of those times, they didn't have any of this. So it doesn't. The New Testament's completely irrelevant here.
or who do anything else that contradicts the wholesome teaching. Now let's look at another verse that talks about how slaves should be treated properly and encourages the proper treatment of slaves. Let's just say a slave escapes from his master. Notice what it says here. If
But this is not talking about slaves that. Okay, so again, I'll give him some credit for tackling these disgusting Bible verses, but he's doing it in such a dishonest way. Sometimes not even dishonest, just flat out lying, because this has nothing to do with the slave that you've purchased. It does not. No, it does not. This is talking about runaway slaves, ideally from other nations who have escaped their slave masters. They're not your slave. You didn't purchase them. They are an escaped slave. They're a runaway slave. Um, what do you do? What do you do with these slaves? This has nothing to do with uh, the 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 Gentile slaves that you've purchased or war captives, etc.,
If
etc.
slaves should escape from their masters and take refuge with you, you must not hand them over to their masters. Let them live among you in any town they choose and do not oppress them. So the idea is this:
Yeah.
if a slave somehow escapes from their master, it more than likely implies that that master was mistreating or abusing that slave, and therefore the wrong thing to
Or maybe they just didn't want to be a slave anymore. So it's a theory. It's a theory. Some have been known to think about it, escaping slavery.
do would be to send that slave back to a master who has already been abusing or mistreating them. The right thing to do would be to allow that slave to live in your vicinity or even in your own home.
Okay, so hypothetical situation here. You're one of the women who only served your 2 month sentence or 6 month sentence of slavery, whatever he said earlier in the video. If so, so she's not allowed to marry a male slave and circumvent her 7 years servitude. She's not allowed to do that, but she is allowed to run away from that slave, and that slave has no recourse. He can't do anything about it. She ran away. So you know what I mean? That whole situation's stupid. It's silly.
So this is yet
This
another
is
provision
nonsense.
to ensure the proper treatment of slaves as
That's not a provision to ensure the proper treatment. Okay. Okay.
individuals. And then there was a death penalty. Notice it says here, anyone who assaults or kills another person must be put to death. So right away,
What? What? Hold on. What do you say?
anyone who assaults or
Exodus 21:12. Let me just you know what? I forgot I had nah. Yeah, you know what? Yeah, let's bring it up. We'll bring it up on screen. Exodus 21:12. No, that's not what it says. That's not what it says. It doesn't say anyone who assaults a person must be put to death. It says anyone who strikes a person with a fatal blow. And this isn't even covering slaves, right? This is covering personal injuries. Yeah, I think so. So this would apply to everybody. This is I mean this is thou shalt not kill. What a way to paint that. Anyone who assaults and kills. Oh, you know what? I misread that. I'm stupid. Anyone who assaults and kills another person must be put to death. My bad. I misread. I'm not going to cut it out, but we'll
or
just keep going.
kills another person must be put to
Oh,
death. So
okay. So
right
he said it. No, 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 no. Okay, no, I was right. I was right. I was right. He says he doesn't read his own thing correctly. I didn't misread. I miss I misread, but I heard correctly. It's very hot in this room, so excuse me. But he says anyone who assaults or kills, and that's not what it says.
Anyone
It's
who
not.
assaults
I
or
thought that was
kills
stupid.
another person must be put to death. So, right away, if you are someone who had slaves, if you knew that you killed a person, that you would actually be killed, you would give some second thought as to how you would treat these slaves. And then there's another law
Well,
regarding
no.
injured slaves. Notice what it says here. If a man hits his male or female slave in the eye and the eye is blinded, he must let the slave go free to compensate for the eye.
Yeah, so it's a little bit less fair for a slave because I think if you're not a slave and you hit somebody in the eye, it's an eye for an eye. Where in a slave's case, it's an eye for a freedom.
And if a man
And yeah, okay, no, no.
knocks out the tooth of his male or female slave, he must let the slave go free to compensate for the tooth. So you see here, you don't just as a slave or just get to beat somebody and to however you want to. You don't just get carte blanche to do the no.
Okay, okay. So this is really stupid, right? Because it doesn't matter the degree in which you get to cause physical harm to another person, in this case, a slave. The degree to which you are allowed to do it is irrelevant, um, because you are still allowed to strike them in any sense. That's a bad thing. Maybe just keep your hands to yourselves. But the Bible does not say any such thing.
No, no, no. If you beat somebody and they have a bad eye, you have to go free. If you knock out the
A bad no, not a bad eye. If you destroy their eye, if they can no longer use if the eye is no longer functioning, it doesn't. This is dishonesty at its best.
tooth, they have to go free. So what is this teaching? It's pretty clear that if you are a person who has slaves, it would not be in your best interest to just beat these slaves because number one, you might kill them, which means you're going to die.
So you're telling me that you're going to kill them. So okay. There's a few problems with this because number one, if your slave isn't doing anything, how are you supposed to get them to do something? If you say, "Hey, slave, go till the land," and they say no and eat your popcorn, what are you to do about that? There has to be some, uh, you know, let's just say that they're a war captive. You just went to the nation, you conquered the nation, and now you have this war captive slave, and he just sits around all day and does nothing. What are you supposed to do to encourage him to do some work for you? Number one. Um, Number two, you're not gonna you if you think like some form of lashings back in the day wasn't a thing, like, well, you're wrong. So I think it's saying, don't cause permanent, and mind you, this is protections for Hebrew slaves specifically and only. This whole section was supposed to cover the slaves under the Leviticus law about who the slaves that are your property forever. But he moved on from that, and you know what? I'm gonna give him a pass because this video is going on for a very long time. So we're giving Allen Parr a pass for that. But it's saying, don't cause catastrophic injuries, permanent physical debilitating injuries to your slave. But it doesn't say you can't beat him with a rod or with a lash, a whip or whatever. You absolutely can do that. And if you do that and the slave doesn't die from said injuries, you are not to be punished. It says it explicitly. It doesn't say if you lash your slave, you are to be lashed. It says if you cause permanent debilitating injuries to your fellow Hebrew, mind you, slave, yeah, that don't do that. Your slave's gonna go free. Uh, no such protections exist for these slaves under the Levitical law, and um, you are not to be punished for beating your slave. It says it. It does. It does say it.
Number two, you might have to let them go free. And number three, What good is this slave to you if they can't work for a week or two because you beat them so bad, right?
Well, so maybe for the week or two, they're not they're not the most beneficial to you. But I bet once they recover, they're probably gonna work pretty hard for you to, to avoid that of happening to them again.
Right? You're going to end up hurting yourself. So none of these things really encourage the mistreatment of slaves in
Under Allen Parr's logic, the the slaves from the transatlantic slave trade, they wouldn't have been beaten either, because what good is a slave to you if if you beat them too hard? Well, they were nonetheless.
the Old Testament. And then finally, the verse in question, which is the idea of corporal punishment. And this brings us back to the verse I read at the very beginning of this particular video. It says this: if a man beats his male or female slave with a club and the slave dies as a result, the owner must be punished. But if the slave recovers within a day,
And mind you, it says the owner must be punished, but it doesn't say the owner must be put to death. Um, because what he brought up earlier, I believe from Deuteronomy, was not covering treatment of slaves. It was covering treatment in general, I believe. I'd have to go back. Um, but it says he must be punished. It doesn't say he must be put to death. Um, but we keep
or
going.
two, then the owner shall not be punished, since the slave is his property. So this does let us know that yes, corporal punishment was part of the culture, was part of the society.
Didn't he just go on a whole thing about how you would not beat your slave because what good is he to you? You might kill him, you might injure him, you might lose the slave, you might be all these other things, and then go on. Then he immediately just walks back all of that. I had to do the walking back for him. I wish I knew he was about to say this, because it could have saved me a bunch of time and breath. But then he just goes on to say that, well, actually, yeah, you could beat him. Yeah, you could beat him a little bit, sure.
It was part of how people were disciplined in the military. It was also encouraged throughout the Old Testament regarding how parents can and should discipline their children whenever they get out of line.
Oh, Alan, what it? Okay, one of my most disliked videos ever was talking about corporal punishment towards children, and I'll say it again. Don't hit your kids. Just don't do it. Don't do it. I'm not talking about beating them within an inch of their life. I'm saying don't do it. Don't lay hands on anybody. Keep your hands to your damn self, for starters. But man, he just keeps picking up on the disgusting apologist. He's a disgusting apologist, and now he's bringing it. I said earlier, maybe he's a great person in his real life, but he just gets paid to lie. But he just said you should use corporal punishment to discipline your children. It's disgusting. Don't do that. Don't do that. Just don't do that. Don't do that ever. Don't hit your kids. Don't spank them. Don't beat them. Don't just keep your hands to yourself. If you have to resort to physical punishment to get your kids to behave in a way that you have deemed proper or appropriate, you are failing. You are failing. You are failing. Don't hit your kids. Don't do that.
It talks about not sparing the
But again, to bring it back into the context of this video, he just went on this whole tangent about how you don't want to hit him, don't want to beat him. Why would you do this? You're losing money. You might lose your slave. You might lose your eye. You might lose your tooth. But also, yeah, you can you can give him a little tap tap. Disgusting.
rod, things of that nature. But it doesn't mean you should beat your children. It doesn't mean you should knock their teeth.
How do you how do you what's the malfunction? What gear is broken? What oil do you need? What grease do you need in your brain to get the gears turning in such a way that you would never utter a sentence like, you should use corporal punishment against your children, but that doesn't mean to beat them. Yes, it does. That's what corporal punishment is. Jesus. Okay. We're wrapping this up,
Teeth
so let's
out
go.
or their eyes or anything like that. Because if you do that, you're going to go to jail, right? There's consequences for going too far. But if you have someone who
There's oh God, there's consequences to go. What's I have a question. I have a question, Allen Parr. What's just far enough when speaking about using physical force against another person in order to submit them to your will? Tell me what's just far enough. You don't want to take the beating too far. So, what's just far enough? I would like an answer. He's not
is a
going to answer.
slave and they get out of order, they mistreat you, they do something wrong. Let's just say they try to sleep with your wife or something like that. Yeah,
What
you have the right to discipline them strongly to make sure that they don't
the? you know, you know, these words. Um, what do they mean? What does that mean? You don't want to beat them. You want. You should use corporal punishment. You don't want to beat them. If they get out of line, you should beat them with a rod, but you don't want to take it too far. Um,
get out of line. Again, you have the right to discipline them strongly to make
and then you have the right to discipline them strongly via beatings and corporal punishment. What does this, man? These people are, you know.
sure that they don't get out of line again. And this is what it's talking about. But you don't want to go too far in terms of your discipline, in terms of how you punish this particular person. Now, the third and final thing we'll look at is
So, does Jesus condone beating slaves? I don't care. I don't care. The Bible condones it as a whole. Um, I don't care what Jesus condoned because well, we'll get into it, but does the Bible condone slavery? Allen Parr says, yes, it does. Does the Bible condone beating your slaves? The title of this video, does the Bible condone slave masters beating their slaves? Yes, it does, according to the Bible, but also according to Allen Parr. So, yes, it does. He's answering. I don't think Allen Parr got the grasp the concepts of apologetics because when a question like does the Bible condone slave masters beating their slaves, the answer in an apologist sense should be no, 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 you got it all wrong. But Allen Parr is just like, yeah, yeah, it does. Yeah, yeah, corporal punishment and beating, just don't take it too far. Don't take don't take the beatings too far. We'll keep going. We're almost wrapped up with this. Hopefully he has like some long outro because I'm fed up with Alan Parr right now. But does Jesus condone beating slaves? I don't. Okay, I don't know if he would accept and allow beating slaves because he has some pretty fishy things he says about slaves, about obeying your masters and especially the cruel ones. You know what? No, I'm gonna say yes. Yes, Jesus condones beating slaves because if he didn't, he would do something like how God banned murder. He would say, "Slave masters, don't beat your slaves, not slaves. Obey your cruel masters." So yes, he does. He does. He does.
does
I'm saying that.
Jesus condone the beating of slaves in the New Testament in one of his parables? So when we come to Luke chapter 12, verses 47 and 48, it says this: And a servant who knows what the master wants, but isn't prepared and doesn't carry out those instructions will be severely punished.
Yeah.
But someone who does not know and then does something wrong will be punished only lightly. When someone has been given much, much will be required in return. And when someone has been entrusted with much, even more will be required. So, once again, guys, this is the reason why it is so important for you and I to have a strong hermeneutic, a strong method for how we study the Bible, because many atheists and skeptics will just take verses like this, cherry pick them, pull them directly out of the
Well, it's not necessary. So I'll be honest. I'm not familiar with this particular verse. I didn't know he was going to bring this verse up. But this is, if I was going to bring up a verse from the New Testament, this isn't the one that I would bring up. Because it kind of sounds like what and a servant who knows what the master wants but isn't prepared and doesn't carry out those instructions will be severely punished. um just reading that as it says, it doesn't necessarily sound like this is in any way condoning or denying or out. It's not talking about the oughts of the situation, but it's just describing what the situation is. So I mean, I'll see what he has to say. I don't particularly care. As I said, the New Testament is irrelevant here to me because of all of the atrocities in the Old Testament, but this is not the verse I would bring up. But we'll see.
context and try to make the Bible say something that it doesn't say. If you look at the context of this particular parable that Jesus is talking about or teaching here, it's clearly talking about the importance of how we should govern ourselves as we await the Lord's return. And basically, the idea is this: it's talking about how different people will be punished in the coming age in terms of those who reject Jesus. So, those who have a firm knowledge of who Jesus is, maybe people who have grown up in
I don't know. I have little to say on this, because A, I don't know, and B, I don't care. I don't care. This is not the problematic verse I would bring up from Jesus. I would bring up, maybe he will get into it, but I would bring up the verse where he talks about how slaves ought obey their, I care about the oughts, the condones. This isn't just particularly just sound like it's describing a situation in which should happen or which ought happen. It's describing just the reality of the situation. If you don't obey, you're going to get beaten. Yeah, that's the reality of it. Sure. Well, so we'll keep going with this.
United States. Maybe they've been to church their whole life. Maybe they grow up in church, but they never accepted Jesus as Savior. You have a firm knowledge of who your master is, but you did not do what you have heard many times that the master has told you to do, which is accept Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior. That particular person is going to be severely punished. But let's just say you have somebody who doesn't know about Jesus. They don't have a firm understanding of who Jesus is as Savior. They don't get a free pass to heaven, but the punishment in the next life in hell is going to be significantly less for that particular servant because they
Well, that's stupid.
did not have the same understanding about Jesus.
Well, that's dumb. Why would that person get punished at all? They didn't know. How do you take something in which you can, like I just said earlier, it doesn't sound like it's describing the way things ought to be, just the way that things are. How do you take that and turn it into something vile and disgusting? It's magic. He's he's bad at what he should be doing, which is apologetics, but he's really, really good at what he actually is doing, which is taking things and making them even more disgusting, like saying war captives is a good, taking a war captive wife after murdering her husband as your wife is an act of goodwill. He's compounding the disgust. He's doing nobody any favors right now, on the Christian side. How did he take that, a verse that I had no problems with inherently, because I don't know the full context of the verse, granted. How do you take that and make it into something awful? People who know about Jesus and reject him, they'll be severely punished in hell. But people who don't know about Jesus, they'll just be punished lightly in hell. For what? For what? Punished for what crime are they being? Okay, come on, man.
As opposed to someone who did.
All right.
That's what the parable is talking about. Jesus is not encouraging the beating or mistreatment of slaves in this
Well,
particular
what about the one where he does say slaves obey your masters, especially the cruel ones?
parable.
What
So,
about
once
them?
again, guys, in order to really and truly navigate through some of these difficult passages, it really is helpful for you to have a strong
It really is helpful to not watch Allen Parr if you want to try to navigate through some of these. This was really bad. This was really bad. He painted slavery in such a good light. He talks about the proper way to treat a slave. He talks about the proper way to marry the woman of which whose husband you just murdered her husband, her sons, the proper way to treat her. He talks about the proper way to well, he doesn't talk about the proper way to be your children. He just says don't take it too far. Beat them for sure, and I'm not exaggerating here. He emphasized you should. He did that. You should beat your children. Um, and and then he talks about how people of well, first off, he just completely just moved off the point of the Gentile slaves. He just moved off of that completely. He didn't even bother touching it. He acted like he was about to, but then he just completely moves on from it and goes back into to the kidnapping and Hebrew slaves. He just didn't touch it. And then he goes on to say that no, you got the verse that Jesus said. You got that all wrong. He's not saying slaves slaves would be beat cruelly if you don't obey properly. Jesus wasn't saying that. All Jesus was saying is that if you've heard of Jesus and you don't follow him, you're going to be punished severely in hell. And if you haven't, you're going to be punished lightly in hell. Silly. He's a wizard of uh, terrible apologetics. He's it's really hot in this room.
grasp on how to study the Word of God for yourself. So,
I feel like I've heard of Jesus and I don't care. I reject whatever Jesus has to say by and large. I don't follow him. I don't believe any divinity of Jesus. And if being in this room right now, I feel like this is the hell that I have been sent to. I need to get air conditioning in here.
So,
It's
if
really
you
hot.
are looking to take your Bible study up to the next level and you want to study the Bible like a theologian, you want to study the Bible like a seminarian, but you don't want to go to seminary, you may not have the money to go to seminary. I've got an entire course called the Bible Accelerator.
Yeah,
And guys, thousands of
yeah,
Christians all over the world have already gone through this course. And
yeah. He's trying to sell a product. That's fine.
I urge you to at least take some time to go below this video, click on the link, and check out this course. It's not a free course, it's a paid course, but I promise you guys, you're going to
Why would you do that? I understand the concept of trying to shill a product to make some money, but we're talking about the Bible here, Allen Parr. Why are you hiding that behind a paywall? I don't think Jesus would like that. I don't think Jesus would like that
to
at
get
all.
immense value from this course, how to study it, and
You will not get immense value from that course. You won't. You just won't do it. Not from Allen Parr.
you'll be able to the rest of your entire life. So check out the Bible Excel.
Okay, looks like we're done with this video. Finally, 20 minutes of Allen Parr, roughly 47 minutes, give or take, of me blabbing on and on. Like the video, subscribe if you've made it this far. I appreciate it. Till the next one, I'm out. Goodbye.